Let's talk a little bit about providing useful peer feedback. Now, feedback is an important element, probably one of the most important elements of becoming a better public speaker. So, when we talk about the art of public speaking and we talk about communication being a skill, right? A skill is something that if we use the word skill in relation to public speaking, that means that if we practice it, by the very nature of it being a skill, then we're going to become better over time. So with practice and with preparation, you are all going to become better public speakers. That is an absolute given. You will look back at the end of the semester and you will see the progress that you have made. Now, one of the most important elements of becoming a better public speaker is utilizing the feedback that is given to you. So you're going to be asked to do self-reflections, which is a form of self-feedback, but you're also going to get feedback from me as your speech instructor. I've taught over 30 sections of public speaking. I've taught public speaking to graduate students, to undergraduate students. I've given speeches in both personal and professional settings to groups as small as 3 people to groups as large as 1,000 people in a gymnasium. And providing feedback, receiving feedback is one of the things that will allow you to become a better speaker. So I will draw from my years of experience and provide you instructor feedback. However, one of the most important elements is peer feedback. What do your peers say? A peer means someone who is in the same position as you. They're on the same playing field. They're on that same plane, that same level. And so your peers for this class are going to be the people who are taking the class with you. You're seeing each other's videos on the Facebook page, Facebook group page, and you're asked to comment and provide feedback on those videos. So providing useful peer feedback is going to be a critical and very important element of you becoming a better public speaker over the course of our semester. Now, a common mistake that students always make with peer feedback is that they make comments like this, and this is fine, but we're going to talk about how it can be much better. They'll say things like, "Wow, I really loved your speech. Really cool topic. You did a great job. Fantastic job. I really liked it." Now, that positive feedback is useful and it is important, and we'll talk about why we should always start with positive feedback. But if you only provide those short statements of affirmation, of positive affirmation, then that doesn't provide any room for constructive feedback. So there's nothing there from these types of comments that allow someone to be reflective and to grow and become a better public speaker. It would be like being at work and your boss comes up and says, "You know what, if you do that again, you're fired." And then they'll walk away and you have no idea what they're talking about. Right? You know you did something bad, but you have no idea specifically what it was, and therefore there's no way that you really can improve or make sure that you don't do that again. Now, if your boss came up and said, "You know what, I really didn't like the tone that you took with that customer, and if I hear you take that type of tone again, if you talk condescendingly or raise your voice in that manner again, unfortunately, I'm going to have to write you up and put you on probation." So that would be specific. Constructive feedback would be to take that specific comment and take it to the next level. So when you raise your voice for that customer, that could really upset them. And so how about next time when a customer is angry or yelling at you, you say something like, "Sir, I understand that you're really frustrated, and I'm sorry that we didn't meet your level of expectation for having a positive experience today. Let me get my manager and let's see what we can do to fix this and make this right for you." Right? That would be providing specific constructive feedback to an employee, telling them what they did wrong, but then telling them how they could do something differently to improve upon that. So let's talk about that. Think back to a time when someone gave you very useful feedback. What made it useful? Maybe that was at work, maybe it was in class, maybe it was in your personal life, right? And then I want you to take a moment and think of a time when you received unhelpful feedback. Why wasn't it helpful? So go ahead, press pause, take a few minutes, think about these things. Think about the time you received useful feedback and what made it useful. Think about a time when you received unuseful feedback and what was it about that made it not helpful. Once you think about that, come back and we'll move forward. So again, we look at the general feedback that students often give each other, especially with speeches, and I see this all the time. Wow, love it, cool. Now, that's a great starting point, but we need to think about it from the constructive feedback perspective. Constructive, by its very nature, means that we can take something from it and make changes, right? We can construct something new from that information that we're giving. So it's important to remember, or it's important to acknowledge that not all feedback is positive, and not all feedback needs to be negative in order to be useful. So we shouldn't strive to just provide positive feedback, and we shouldn't just strive to provide negative feedback. What we should strive for is to provide constructive feedback. So in doing so, we can criticize elements of the speech and not the person. And that's because when people feel like they're being attacked on a personal level, they close down and they're unlikely to be receptive to any feedback or suggestions that you have. So make clear that you're criticizing elements of the speech and not the person. We also need to be descriptive and very specific in that feedback. We need to be realistic and we need to have a proper tone. So we need to consider how it is that we can say it. Because our class is in an online setting, it's going to be a little bit different. If we were in a face-to-face classroom, I would have students in the class provide you real-time live feedback after you present. We would say, now let's provide some comments and feedbacks that might be constructive for Mary moving forward. Because we're in an online setting, your feedback is going to come via written responses. And so considering your tone is very important, and the wording of things, because we can lose tone very easily in that medium when we look at writing. So for instance, here's one I really like. I really like the way that you use statistics in your speech. However, when you talked about X, you used so many of them that I really had difficulty processing what you were talking about. So that's a specific constructive feedback that says, hey, you really did this good, the use of statistics, and you can be even more specific. I really like the way that you use statistics in your speech. It really added an extra layer of depth and credibility to your argument, and it really made me think, wow, he really knows what he's talking about. However, when you got to that part of your speech where you started to talk about X, the statistics that you use really weren't relevant, and there were so many of them that I really had a hard time following along with your speech, and it really made me almost become disinterested. And so I think moving forward, if you use those statistics more sparingly, or you use statistics in a way that makes them relevant to the audience, we might have an easier time following and staying engaged with your speech. That would be a very specific, very constructive form of feedback. And by the way, don't worry about the use of statistics and research and things yet with your speech. We're going to talk about how to do that and why that is important and how you can do that successfully in your speeches. Now, we talked about providing specific goal-oriented feedback. I like this little model here because it's really clear and it's really successful if you follow this. So when we provide goal-oriented feedback, the purpose there is to provide feedback that is going to help them become a better public speaker for their future speeches. So we need to make sure that the feedback that we are providing is clear and it's specific, like we talked about earlier. The tangible and intangible aspects of the goals is for you to become a better public speaker and for you to earn a good grade in the class. Those are really the reasons why people take this class. They have to take it, but there is this intangible aspect of most people really do want to become a better public speaker, and because of that, they will listen to the feedback that you give them. Do we agree? That is, if there's differences there in feedback, what are the indicators of success? What does a good public speaker look like? What is the value of achieving the goals? What's the observable behaviors? Here's where the objectives are all laid out in the class. We've talked about those things. The behaviors are the things that we're looking for in the speeches. So what are the things that we're able to observe, and how are those relevant to attainment of the goals? What attributions do people make as a result of those behaviors? So you look for things here. If someone has really good eye contact, you can tell them that. Your eye contact with the camera was really phenomenal, and I felt, even though I wasn't sitting in the room with you, even though I was watching a video of you present, I really felt like you were speaking directly to me. And I found that to be a very strong part of your speech. Right? So that would be a positive, specific, goal-oriented feedback, right? That is feedback that allows someone to see that by continuing to do that, they're going to, that's going to help them attain their goals. We move over to the impact, and this is where the example that we were talking about a minute ago. What's the effect of these behaviors? Does it increase or decrease the likelihood of achieving the goal of being a successful speech or becoming a more confident and competent public speaker? Does it enhance or detract from the speaker's reputation or their brand? Does it increase or decrease their ability to influence? Does it build a desired culture, or does it undermine it? So the example that we just gave about the statistics on the previous page, right? We talked about in that very specific example that it had the ability to enhance the presentation, but it also was distracting from the overall. It was increasing the reputation, but it was distracting from the actual presentation itself. And so you can give these very specific examples, and you can say, if you were to implement better eye contact, for instance, you're going to increase the likelihood of your speech being successful. You're going to increase the likelihood that people are going to feel a connection to you. And if people feel a connection to you, your reputation is going to be greater. The perception of your speech being more competent and a better speech is going to be higher. So there's a lot of things here in terms of why we should provide specific goal-oriented feedback. Goal-oriented, again, meaning, right, the reasons why we want to follow certain things and implement changes and constructive feedback to become better, more competent, and comfortable public speakers. I like this. When you end your feedback, you should always suggest one big important takeaway for the next speech. So I want to see you guys do this. As you close your feedback, I want you to suggest one thing, and you can call people by name. You could say, Rick, one thing in closing, I suggest for your next speech, maybe you try to do more of this. Right, so you can show people areas that they were successful, and then provide opportunities and suggestions for them moving forward. So when we provide feedback, in closing here, one thing to think about is it is okay if we go back to the wow, the love it, and the cool. You should always start your feedback with these types of things. Start with the positives. Just because, as I mentioned, if you think about your own life, when people provide negative feedback right off the bat, we close off. Our body language shuts down. We cross our arms. We are not receptive to anything else that they have to say because we feel like they're attacking us as a person, and we take that personal, and then we could care less what it is that they have to say. So you should always start with 3 positive things that you found in the speech. You can say, don't say I loved it unless you really loved it. But you could say, I really found your speech interesting. I'd never really been exposed to this topic before, and I found myself really wanting to learn more about it. I also really liked that you used statistics in very relevant, specific ways that gave your speech a lot of credibility. And I also like your background. I like the fact that it was easy to see you. The lighting appeared to be sufficient, and I was able to easily see and hear your presentation, and that made it more relevant for me, and it wasn't distracting in any ways. Now, I would like to point out a few things that I saw that I think, in terms of constructive feedback, that you can do better in the future. I really think that you can work on making some improvements with eye contact. At times, you made direct eye contact with your audience, and you could tell that you were really trying to have that connection or to build that connection. But at other times, you really seemed to be staring down at the floor. You rarely looked up, and I found that to be both distracting. Not only distracting, but if you were to make more direct eye contact, I think you're going to enhance that connection with your audience, and they're going to have an overall better experience, and I think you can learn and grow from that. So if I had one major thing to suggest for you to work on moving forward, it would be to do some activities and work on making eye contact with your audience and focusing and engaging with them, because I really think you're going to see some benefits from that. Otherwise, I really enjoyed your speech, and I look forward to seeing your next speech. Right? So start with positive, 3 positives, provide very specific, constructive, goal-oriented feedback, and then end with suggesting one next step that's going to help them as they move forward in their next speeches. So that is the basics of providing feedback, providing peer feedback, useful goal-oriented feedback that I hope you find useful as you move forward with your speeches.